It was just past 8 a.m. on a Tuesday in Macon, Georgia. The kind of morning where the sky looked like wet concrete and even the streetlights seemed reluctant to shut off. At the corner of Vineville Avenue, between a pawn shop and a tire outlet, sat a weathered diner with chipped green booths, a buzzing light near the register, and the smell of burnt coffee woven into every inch of fabric. Elias Monroe sat in the farthest booth near the window. Same seat every week. His jacket, an old Army-issue green, was fraying at the elbows, and the patch on his chest had faded into fabric so soft it looked like denim. You wouldn't know it from the outside, but he was once a staff sergeant with honors. 2 tours in Iraq, 1 near-fatal injury in Fallujah. And now, just a man trying to eat breakfast in peace. He wasn't loud. Never was. Elias spoke with the kind of voice that made you lean in. Not because it was soft, but because it had weight. He never asked for much. Scrambled eggs, hash browns, 2 strips of bacon, toast, if it wasn't too burnt, and black coffee. No cream, no sugar. He looked like someone who'd been through more than he'd ever say out loud, the waitress Carla would often think, watching him nurse his coffee like it was the only thing tethering him to the world. To most people, he looked like just another homeless man. No fixed address, no car, the kind of man society trains you to ignore. But to Carla and Harold, the diner owner, Elias was something else. He tipped what little he had, helped mop the floor once when she slipped, never complained, never lingered longer than he needed. He carried himself like someone who had known real discipline, not from authority, but from pain. That morning, the silence of the diner was broken when 2 officers pushed through the door. You could feel it, that shift in the air, that invisible pressure when someone walks in with power they don't have to earn. Officer Langley, all square jaw and smug confidence, scanned the room. His partner, Officer Reese, followed behind, shorter, bulkier, eyes darting. They didn't look at Carla, didn't acknowledge Harold behind the counter. Their eyes went straight to Elias. "Sir," Langley said, voice flat, "you a customer here?" Elias looked up slowly, the way a man looks at weather he's already seen coming. "I am." "You buy anything?" Reese chimed in. Elias nodded toward the steaming cup of coffee. "Paid for it, same as I do every Tuesday." Langley stepped closer. "You got a receipt?" Carla's voice rose before she realized. "He's good. He's here every week. I already put it in." Langley didn't look at her. "I didn't ask you." That sentence, it landed in the room like a slap. Carla froze, lips parted, unsure if stepping in again would make it worse. And I'll tell you right now, I wish I had been there, because there's a certain heat that rises in your chest when you watch someone get humiliated. Not because they've done anything wrong, but because someone in uniform decided they weren't worth the basic courtesy of being human. Langley turned back to Elias. "Got any ID?" Elias nodded. Slowly, he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, no sudden moves, and pulled out a worn leather wallet. Inside, a cracked VA card, military ID number barely visible. No driver's license, no home address. "This is all you've got?" Reese sneered. "It's all I've ever needed," Elias replied. They didn't like that answer. Langley huffed, pulling out his notepad. "Name? Elias Monroe. Date of birth? February 10th, 1968. Reese left to run the info." Langley stood in front of Elias like a mall security guard trying to prove something, shifting his weight from boot to boot. The tension was thick now. You could feel it crackling off the booths. Harold wiped his hands and stepped out from behind the counter. "Officers," he said carefully, "this man's been coming here for years. He's never caused a single problem. Are you responding to something? Or is this just a routine harassment?" Langley glared at him. "We're responding to a complaint." That was a lie, by the way. There was no complaint. Just 2 men in a patrol car, bored and in need of someone to remind who was in charge. Elias said nothing. He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. He just sat there, shoulders squared, coffee cooling beside him, and looked at Langley like a man who'd survived worse. Because he had. And this part gets me every time. Because some people think strength is loud. But Elias, his strength was the kind you carry quietly. the kind that comes from standing your ground, even when the ground tries to move under you. Then Elias did something no one expected. He reached into his coat one more time, not fast, not threatening, and pulled out a flip phone. Yes, a flip phone, the kind you only see in movies or old drawers. He opened it, pressed a single button, and held it to his ear. A pause. Then he spoke. "It's happening again." The second Elias said, "It's happening again," the entire diner paused. Not just the air, the pulse of the place shifted. Langley froze. Reese, returning from the patrol car with a tablet under his arm, stopped mid-step. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" Langley barked. Elias didn't answer. Didn't need to. He simply flipped the phone closed, set it down on the table, and folded his hands. That's when the panic set in. Not for Elias, but for the two men in blue who suddenly looked like they were standing on a tripwire they couldn't see. Langley stepped forward, fists clenching. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stand up and step outside." "No, he's not," Harold said firmly from behind the counter. Langley turned sharply. "What did you say?" "I said," Harold replied, stepping around the register, "he's not going anywhere unless you're arresting him. And if you are, you better have a real charge, not just whatever ego trip you're on." Carla gasped quietly. No one had ever spoken to a cop like that in the diner. Not here. Not in Macon. Langley's jaw ticked. "You interfering, sir?" "I'm protecting my customer and my employee," he added, eyes darting to Carla, who was now visibly trembling behind the coffee machine. And here's where the line broke. You could feel it. A line most people are too afraid to cross because they've seen what happens when someone does. But that's the thing about men like Elias. They make others brave just by existing. Reese spoke next, tone smug. "He's a vagrant. He's been cited before in Albany for loitering. We've got him flagged." Elias's voice, cool as winter steel, cut through the room. "You've got me flagged? For eating breakfast?" Reese opened his mouth, then closed it. Langley tried again. "This establishment is private property. If they want you to leave—" "I don't," Harold said. "He's welcome. Every Tuesday, like clockwork." Langley took a step closer to Elias. "Then I'm giving you a lawful order to stand up and—" And that's when the door opened. Not with a creak, not with a bell chime. It burst open. A man in a navy overcoat stepped through. Fast, focused, no hesitation. He wasn't big, not tall, not flashy. But the moment he walked in, the whole room knew he wasn't just anybody. "Officers," he said, calm, cold. "Badge numbers, now." Langley blinked. "Excuse me? Your badges. I need them. Both of you." "Who the hell are you?" Reese asked. He flipped open a leather case. Mark Sorrell, Deputy Director, U.S. Department of Justice, Internal Oversight. Dead silence. That was the moment everything cracked, because nothing frightens small-time tyrants more than the sound of federal boots on their turf. Langley swallowed. "We were just responding to—" "You were interrogating a veteran in a diner," Sorrell snapped, "with no probable cause, on camera, with intent. That's not a response. That's a problem." Carla gasped. Reese took half a step back. Harold crossed his arms and muttered, "Well, hell just got interesting." Sorrell didn't sit. He didn't soften. He walked straight to Elias, looked him in the eye, and said, "You okay?" Elias nodded once. "Better now." Langley tried one last time. "Sir, I don't think you understand." "I understand perfectly. You thought you could flex on someone who looked powerless. But guess what?" He turned to the rest of the room. "This man has more federal clearance than either of you ever will. You just pulled a gun on the quietest hero in this damn county." And right there in that beat of stillness, the shame began to sink in. Not guilt, not remorse. Just that creeping rot of a man who realized he'd finally gone too far. And this time, someone with a title saw it. Langley tried to save face. "He didn't look like a vet." Sorrell's eyes narrowed. "And what does a veteran look like to you?" Langley couldn't answer, because the truth is, he wasn't thinking at all. He saw a black man, in an old coat, sitting quietly in a corner. And that was enough for him to reach for his badge and treat it like a hammer. I can't stand that. That assumption. That rot of authority unchecked. Because it's never about safety. It's about power and fear and the desperate need to remind someone that in this moment, in this place, they are smaller. Reese shifted, suddenly aware that his body cam was still rolling. Sorrel noticed. "Don't bother deleting the footage," he said. "We've already got a copy." DOJ flagged the call as soon as Mr. Monroe placed it. Langley's face paled. "That was a DOJ line?" "No," Elias said softly. "It was my friend from the 82nd Airborne, now a senior advisor in the Office of Veteran Affairs." Langley looked like he'd swallowed a nail. "I fought for this country," Elias said, finally rising to his feet. "I bled for it, and I will not be treated like trash in my own hometown by men who hide behind a badge they didn't earn." God, I felt that. I wanted to punch the air, because it wasn't just about Elias. It was about every person who's ever been looked at like they didn't belong, just because someone couldn't imagine them as worthy. Carla stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "He's family here. You don't get to walk in here and make him feel less." Harold nodded. "You messed up, boys." Langley said nothing. Sorrel sighed. "Effective immediately. You're both on administrative leave. You'll be hearing from IA, the Ethics Board, and possibly a federal hearing. You'll also be subpoenaed." He turned to Elias. "You want to file charges?" Elias shook his head. "I want them to remember my face the next time they look at someone like me." Elias didn't sleep that night, not because he couldn't, but because sleep felt like a luxury he hadn't earned. Not yet. He sat beneath the overpass near the shelter, back pressed against the cold concrete, the letter from the VA still clenched in his hand, like it might dissolve if he let it go. A folded coat served as a pillow, but no matter how tightly he wrapped it around himself, it couldn't shield him from the weight that pressed on his chest. He could still see Officer Langley's eyes, that smug, dismissive glare. He could still hear Carla's voice, trembling with fury, cutting through the diner's silence. And he could still feel the eyes on him, some with pity, some with disbelief, but most with awakening. The world had watched a man nearly get humiliated for ordering breakfast. A veteran, a decorated soldier. But more than that, a man. And that man had to make a phone call to be treated like one. The next morning, the diner was different. Not just in its air, but in how it breathed. There was a stillness in the way people stirred their coffee, a solemnity in how they looked at the booth Elias always sat in. Carla had brought in fresh flowers from her porch garden, sunflowers, big and unapologetic, and placed them in a chipped vase by the window. A gesture, small but loud. When Elias walked in, same boots, same coat, same soft eyes, every head turned, but no one said a word. Harold didn't ask him if he wanted the usual. He just brought it over. Hot, crisp, perfect. Carla topped off his coffee without asking, then sat across from him. "They suspended them both," she said. Elias didn't respond. He just blew softly over the rim of his cup and sipped. "But you should know something else," she continued. "The precinct? They're under federal review now. DOJ's opening a formal probe. Sorrel didn't just come to check on you. He came to collect names." Still no reaction from Elias, but inside he wasn't silent. He was burning, not with revenge, not with victory, with clarity. Because now, finally, he wasn't invisible. But it shouldn't have taken a viral video for that to happen. Later that afternoon, Elias sat at a park bench just beyond the diner. The sun filtered through old oaks and warmed his skin. Across from him, a young man, no older than 22, hesitantly approached. "You're Elias, right?" the kid asked, fidgeting with a press badge clipped to his jacket. "I'm sorry if this is a bad time." Elias looked up. "No such thing," he replied. "I'm working on a piece for the Mercer Gazette," the boy said. "About you, about what happened, and I just wanted to say thank you. My dad's a vet, too. He saw the video. He cried, man. He never cries." Elias paused. For a moment, his face softened. "What's your dad's name?" James Halverson." "I remember him," Elias said quietly. "Tourin' to Crit. Good man. Calm under fire." The kid blinked. "You knew him?" Elias nodded. "Saved my life once. Told me to keep my head down when it counted." And now here they were, full circle. That evening, Elias returned to the shelter and found a stack of letters waiting for him. Hundreds. Handwritten notes, typed out emails, drawings from children. A photo of a little girl holding up a sign that said, "Thank you, Mr. Elias, for being brave when no one else would." One envelope had no return address, but inside was a laminated badge holder with a note scrawled in shaky penmanship. "This should never be pointed at someone like you." It held a folded American flag pin. Elias closed his eyes. Let the weight of it rest in his palm. He didn't cry, but his chest rose slowly, like a tide finally catching its breath. What he didn't know was that, in the days following, police departments across the country would begin mandatory retraining modules on de-escalation. That veteran shelters would receive a sudden spike in donations, many in the name of Clarence Dry and Elias Monroe. That protests, peaceful, quiet, resolute, would sprout in places where names like his were only ever whispered in eulogies. And that 2 weeks later, at a town hall in Atlanta, a woman in her 70s would stand up and say, "My husband died in Fallujah. My son sleeps in a tent outside Boise. And I saw a man named Elias Monroe stand taller while sitting down than any officer with a badge did that day." Maybe it's time we asked what courage really looks like. You wanted rage? It's here. You wanted justice? It's coming. But most of all, you wanted to be heard, and now you are. It started with an email. Subject line, "Elias, they're reopening your case." No fanfare, no fireworks, just 16 words in the body of the message from a civil rights attorney named Janelle Parrish. She didn't work for the government. She wasn't funded by any nonprofit. She was the daughter of a veteran who once slept under the same bridge Elias did. "We're going to make sure every violation on your record gets reviewed and cleared." Elias didn't reply. Not because he wasn't grateful, but because he wasn't used to people showing up without asking for something in return. He read the email 3 times, then closed his eyes. He let the silence answer. That same week, Officer Langley's disciplinary hearing became public. The footage from the body cam had already done enough damage, but it was the audio, the tone of his voice, the words he used, the way he sneered the phrase, "You don't look like you belong here," that caught fire across the internet like gasoline on concrete. Every clip, every reaction, every share. Some watched with tears, others with clenched fists. But no one was watching in silence anymore. At a city council meeting days later, a small crowd had gathered, not with signs or chants, but with quiet. Dozens stood in the back wearing T-shirts that simply said, "I am Elias Monroe." They didn't shout. They didn't interrupt. They just stood, veterans, teachers, single mothers, students, men in hard hats, women in scrubs. All of them had come not because Elias had asked, but because he had finally made them see. And when Elias was invited to speak, he didn't take the microphone immediately. He walked slowly to the front, took a long breath, and then he began. "I didn't want to become a story. I just wanted to finish my breakfast in peace. I've worn the uniform. I've fought in 2 wars, but the only time I feared for my life on American soil was holding a coffee mug. That day, the badge wasn't protection. It was a threat. And the only weapon I ever pulled was a phone." The room was still. This city failed me, not because I was unhoused, not because I was black, but because I was both. And if you think that's coincidence, you haven't been paying attention. That night, a petition began circulating. Create the Elias Monroe Act. The law would require every Georgia precinct to report officer complaints involving unhoused individuals and veterans to a civilian review board. Within 48 hours, no exceptions. It started with 500 signatures. By morning, it had 50,000. Meanwhile, Langley tried to disappear. He deactivated his social accounts, declined all interviews. His legal team went quiet, hoping the story would fade. But it didn't. Because this story wasn't just about a man wronged. It was about how many times it had happened before, and no one noticed. So when Officer Reese was quietly asked to resign, there was no applause. Only a quiet sigh, like a storm cloud finally releasing the weight it had been holding. 3 days later, Elias received an envelope. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a metal card. No return address, no signature. Just a handwritten line. You stood for all of us who were too tired to speak. Now we've got your back. The metal card? Lifetime access to a local shelter-to-housing transition program? Fully funded. No expiration. Elias stared at it for a long time. He didn't smile. Not yet. But he folded it carefully and placed it in his wallet, behind his VAID. This time, it was the one thing that actually opened doors. The next morning, as he stepped out of the shelter, someone was waiting for him outside. A little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7, hair in braids, holding a cup of coffee. "For you," she said shyly. "My daddy said you're a real soldier." Elias knelt slowly to meet her eyes. "I was," he said softly, "but I'm just a man now." She beamed. "You're the good kind." And just like that, for the first time in years, Elias laughed. A small, honest laugh that felt like it belonged to someone who still had a little boy inside him. The news cycle would move on, of course. Another scandal, another fire, another protest. But the name Elias Monroe would stay. Not because he wanted it to, but because too many others never got the chance. Too many were buried without justice. Silenced before they could make a phone call. Erased from the table before they even asked for a seat. But not Elias. He picked up the phone, and the whole country answered. The apartment wasn't big, just a one-bedroom unit on the edge of a quiet street with no gate, no concierge, no pretense. The kind of place where neighbors wave but don't pry, where the mail always shows up late and the elevator still creaks. But to Elias Monroe, it was a palace. He didn't decorate much at first, just placed a folding chair by the window and stared out at the sidewalk below. Every scratch in the drywall felt like a whisper of whoever lived there before him. Every corner of silence reminded him he wasn't on a cot or under an overpass. For the first few nights, he slept in the living room, fully dressed. Old habits die hard. But on the 4th night, something changed. He placed his boots by the door, laid the blanket across the bed, and let himself sink into the mattress. For once, he didn't listen for sirens, didn't flinch when the air vent clicked, didn't dream of war or of the diner. He just slept, and in that moment, he belonged. In the mornings, Elias walked to a nearby park. He didn't carry much, just a battered journal and a pen that barely wrote. Some days he wrote letters to no one. Other days he just scribbled single words. Home, silence, enough. And every so often, kids from the neighborhood would pass him by, pointing quietly. A few brave ones would approach. "You're the guy from the video, right?" Elias always responded the same way. A soft smile, a nod, and that was just one morning. But it wasn't just one morning anymore. The impact of his stand had rippled outward. The Elias Monroe Act passed in the State House with bipartisan support, unheard of in recent years. Cities outside Georgia began reviewing their own precinct policies. One even named a shelter in his honor. But Elias never asked for his name on anything. What mattered more was the shift in how people saw those who had been forgotten. In the park where Elias wrote, a mural now stretched across the brick wall of an old pharmacy. It wasn't his face on it. It was a silhouette of a man sitting at a diner counter, boots on the floor, coffee in hand, surrounded by words in every shade. You can't erase who built this country. Weeks passed, then months. Elias started volunteering at a local high school, not as a speaker, but as a quiet presence in the library. Just someone to talk to, the kind of adult he never had growing up. One afternoon, a boy named Marcus, sharp tongue, hoodie always half-sipped, asked him, "Did it change you, being on the news like that?" Elias thought for a long while, then replied, "No, but it made people see who I've always been." The boy nodded, almost like he understood. "I want to get seen too." Elias smiled. "Then you better start by showing up, even when they don't clap." Despite everything, Elias never got used to the attention. When a veterans group invited him to speak at their national gathering, he almost declined. But something in him, something deep and tired and ready, said yes. That evening, in a hall full of uniforms and folded flags, Elias walked to the stage without a speech. He stood tall, not with pride, but with clarity. We don't talk enough about what happens after the fight, he said, about the ones who come home but don't feel welcome, about those who traded years for a flag and got silence in return. We don't all end up on camera. Most of us vanish. But I'm here because someone saw me and chose to care. The room was silent. Then someone clapped. Then more. Then everyone. But Elias didn't smile for the applause. He smiled because he saw Marcus sitting in the back, watching, leaning forward, learning. On the walk home, Elias passed a bus stop and paused. A man was sitting on the bench, hood up, shoulders hunched, boots fraying. For a moment, Elias saw his old self. He walked over slowly. "Mind if I sit?" The man looked up, wary, but nodded. They sat together for minutes. No small talk, just presence. Then Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded card, the same one he was given months ago. Shelter to housing program. No expiration. "I don't need it anymore," he said, pressing it into the man's hand. "But maybe you do." The man stared at him. "You don't even know me." Elias stood. "I don't need to." That night, back in his apartment, Elias sat by the window again. This time he had pictures on the wall. A chair that didn't fold, a shelf with books, most unread, a new pair of boots by the door, and a framed letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs. At the bottom, under a government seal, was a line that read, "In recognition of a life lived in silent service, until the world had to listen." He looked at it for a while, then turned off the light. No fear, no panic, just the sound of a man finally letting himself rest. Months passed, then a year. The world kept spinning. News cycles churned, social media moved on, and news stories rose to the surface. But in one corner of Georgia, a quiet legacy was taking root. It began with a name, the Monroe Project, a local nonprofit founded by a coalition of veterans, activists, and educators, most of whom had never met before the viral video. Its mission? Simple. To make sure no veteran ever fades into invisibility again. No press releases, no gala fundraisers, just work, food vouchers, mental health support, transitional housing, legal advocacy for those denied their VA benefits. And at the center of it all, Elias Monroe. Not as the face, but as the fire. Elias didn't want a leadership title. He didn't want a desk. What he did want was a seat in the back of every meeting, a voice on every policy, a hand in the dirt when they renovated abandoned buildings into tiny home villages for homeless vets. He showed up every day. And soon the Monroe Project didn't feel like an organization. It felt like a movement, one built on the belief that dignity is not a privilege. It's a birthright. I remember one morning because I was there. We were handing out kits behind an old rec center turned shelter, toothpaste, blankets, socks. It was cold. Not the kind of cold that bites your skin, but the kind that reminds you you've been forgotten. An old Marine named Sam came through the line, scar across his eyebrow, no gloves, boots falling apart. He looked at Elias and said, "Ain't no one called me by my name in 3 weeks." Elias didn't hesitate. "Then let's fix that." "Morning, Sam." And I watched something small and sacred happen. Sam stood taller. That's the thing about people like Elias. They don't need a microphone, just presence. They restore people in inches. The Monroe Project grew. Within 2 years, it had branches in 5 states. Students started writing papers about it. Community colleges invited Elias to speak, even when he said he wasn't a speaker. He showed up anyway. He told stories. Not dramatic ones, not the kind that make headlines. Stories about waiting, about being overlooked, about what it feels like to carry your country on your back, only to be asked to leave the diner. And it was in those quiet rooms, those folding chair auditoriums and gymnasium echo chambers, that people cried the most, because they saw themselves, or someone they had ignored. Then one day a package arrived at the Monroe Project office. No return address, just a navy blue folder, sealed with a brass emblem. Inside was a formal invitation. The Office of the President of the United States requests the presence of Mr. Elias Monroe at the annual National Veterans Policy Summit. No speech required, no obligation to attend, but Elias did, not because he wanted to meet anyone, but because he knew what it would mean for every vet still sleeping in their car, for every mother waiting on a call from the VA, for every child who watched their parent fade in silence. He wore the same jacket, the old military one, patched, worn, proud, not for ceremony, for memory. As he stepped onto the White House lawn, reporters swarmed. Cameras clicked. A young journalist asked him, "Mr. Monroe, how does it feel to be recognized?" He paused, looked at the building behind her, looked at the rows of chairs lined up under the flag, and then he said, "Recognition is nice, but I came for the ones who never got it." That line was replayed for weeks, etched into op-eds, quoted in documentaries, printed on T-shirts. But Elias went home the same day. No dinner, no after-party, just home. Because he wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing change. One spring afternoon, I visited Elias. The apartment hadn't changed much. Still modest, still quiet. But there was a bulletin board now, pinned edge to edge with letters. Not from politicians, from people. "You helped my brother get off the streets. I finally got my benefits. I watched your interview and I didn't give up." He read every single one, some twice. Then one day, Elias handed me a small envelope and said, "Read it out loud." It was written by a boy named Marcus, the same Marcus from the high school library, now 17, accepted into college, studying public policy. The note read, "Mr. Monroe, you told me to show up even if no one claps. I did. I'm going to change the rules from the inside, like you taught me. Thank you for making space where I could belong." I looked up. Elias wasn't smiling. He was crying, for the first time. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Elias never made that phone call in the diner. If Carla hadn't stood up, if Sorrel hadn't walked in, if no one had recorded that moment. But I also wonder if it would have mattered, because a man like Elias, he would have changed the world either way, quietly, fiercely, one moment at a time. In the end, his legacy wasn't in a headline. It was in the way people looked at veterans differently, in the policies rewritten, in the kids who now ask questions instead of crossing the street, in the belief that silence is not weakness, and service never expires. Elias Monroe never asked for recognition, but in the end, the nation stood, and not just for him, but for everyone like him. The quiet warriors, the ones in diner booths, the ones with calloused hands and folded flags, the ones who sat still so others could finally see.